Welcome to the channel, US Coins Lab. And before we dive in, I need you to do one thing right now. Stop whatever you're doing, put down your phone, pause that other video, and give me your complete, undivided attention for the next few minutes, because what I am about to share with you today is the kind of information that most people never get to hear, the kind of secret that has been sitting in dusty coin jars, forgotten dresser drawers, and old family collections for decades, waiting for someone, maybe someone exactly like you, to finally discover it. And today, that someone is going to be you. We are talking about three coins, three extraordinary, jaw-dropping, almost unbelievable pieces of American history. And by the time this video is over, you're going to look at every single coin you own in a completely different way. Because the truth is, fortunes are not always locked behind bank vaults or hidden in stock markets. Sometimes they're sitting right there in your pocket, disguised as ordinary change. And you would never even know it unless someone like me told you exactly what to look for. Now, the first coin we're covering today, the one we are starting with right now, is already making collectors lose their minds. And I'm going to tell you exactly why in just a moment. But here's what I want you to do first. Stay with me until the very end of this video, because the second coin we are revealing today is something so rare, so mysteriously connected to one of the most controversial moments in United States minting history, that even seasoned numismatists, people who have spent their entire careers studying coins, have described it as finding a ghost. And the third coin, the one we are saving for last, the grand finale, the coin that closes out this video, I'm not even going to hint at what it is yet, because honestly, if I told you now, you might not believe me, and I need you to see the full story before the number hits you. So trust me, stay until the end, because that final reveal is going to absolutely shatter everything you thought you knew about the value of American coinage. But right now, let us talk about the coin that is kicking off our countdown today. The magnificent, the iconic, the breathtaking 1896 $1 coin. A piece so deeply woven into the fabric of American monetary history that holding one in your hand feels less like holding currency and more like holding a piece of the soul of a nation. And the number attached to this coin, the value that collectors, investors, and auction houses have placed on the finest known examples of this coin, is a number that will make your jaw hit the floor, because we're talking about a coin that has been valued at $263 million. And yes, you heard that correctly, $263 million. Not $263,000, not $2 million, but $263 million. And the story behind why this one coin has climbed to such an astronomical valuation is one of the most fascinating, dramatic, and deeply human stories in all of numismatic history. So let's get into it right now. The year is 1896, and America is at a crossroads, not just politically, not just economically, but monetarily in the most literal sense of the word, because this was a nation that was fighting a fierce and passionate battle over the very definition of money itself, a battle that spilled from the halls of Congress into the streets, into newspapers, into the hearts and minds of ordinary working Americans who simply wanted to understand whether their country's future would be built on gold or on silver. And it was in this charged, electric, historically significant atmosphere that the United States Mint was producing the 1896 Morgan silver dollar, a coin that, even by the standards of its own turbulent time, stood apart as something special. The Morgan dollar itself, named after its designer George T. Morgan, a British-born engraver who joined the United States Mint in 1876 and quickly established himself as one of the most gifted and meticulous craftsmen the institution had ever seen, was first struck in 1878 following the passage of the Bland-Allison Act, which required the government to purchase and coin millions of ounces of silver every single month, a political concession to the powerful silver mining interests of the American West. And by 1896, the Morgan dollar had already been in circulation for nearly 2 decades, meaning that most people who encountered one simply accepted it as ordinary money, as everyday currency, as nothing more than a tool for buying bread, paying wages, or settling debts. And that ordinariness, that invisibility, is precisely what makes the finest surviving examples of the 1896 Morgan dollar so extraordinarily valuable today. Because while millions of these coins were struck and millions more were spent, worn, melted, or lost, only a tiny fraction survived in the kind of pristine, untouched, museum-quality condition that collectors now chase with an almost obsessive desperation. Now, what makes the 1896 issue specifically so compelling, beyond the historical moment it represents and beyond the sheer artistry of Morgan's design, which features the iconic portrait of Lady Liberty on the obverse, her hair loosely gathered beneath a Phrygian cap inscribed with the word Liberty, her profile so elegantly rendered that it has never been fully equaled in American coin design before or since, is a combination of factors that, when you understand them together, explain not just why this coin is worth what it is worth, but why it almost feels like it was destined to become one of the most coveted numismatic treasures in American history. First, consider the mintage figures for 1896, because while the Philadelphia Mint struck a substantial number of Morgan dollars that year, the distribution of those coins across the grades, from heavily circulated examples that show decades of wear and handling to the breathtaking uncirculated gems that look as though they were struck yesterday, is wildly uneven, with the absolute top tier of surviving specimens representing such a vanishingly small percentage of the total that finding one in. That condition is less like a lucky discovery and more like a miracle. And it is those miracle coins, those survivors of over a century of time and chance and human carelessness, that carry the valuations that make headlines and shake the foundations of auction rooms around the world. Second, and perhaps even more important than the rarity of the top-grade specimens, is the story of the great Treasury releases, those extraordinary moments in the mid-20th century, particularly in 1962 and 1963, when the United States government opened up its vast silver dollar reserves and released hundreds of millions of Morgan dollars directly into circulation, flooding the market with coins that had been sitting in government vaults since the day they were struck, untouched by human hands, preserved by sheer governmental inertia, in conditions that no collector could ever have deliberately engineered. And it was during these releases that some of the most spectacular gem-quality Morgan dollars ever seen, including certain 1896 specimens that had slept undisturbed in canvas bags for 60 or 70 years, suddenly appeared in the hands of astonished bank tellers, curious collectors, and breathless numismatists who could barely believe what they were looking at. The surfaces on the finest of these released coins, surfaces that had never been cleaned, never been polished, never been subjected to the oils and friction of human handling, displayed what collectors call original mint luster, that deep, cartwheel-spinning, almost liquid brilliance that is the unmistakable signature of a coin that has never been touched since the moment it left the dies. And it is that luster, combined with the sharpness of the strike, the depth of the fields, the cameo, contrast between the frosted devices and the mirror-like background, and the overall visual perfection of the coin that pushes the finest 1896 Morgan dollars into a valuation territory that most people simply cannot process the first time they hear it. Because $263 million is not just a number. It is a testament to what happens when history, artistry, rarity, and perfect preservation all converge in a single object that fits in the palm of your hand. Think about what that means for a moment. Think about the journey this coin has taken, from the engraving room where George Morgan carefully refined his master dies, to the coining press that struck it with thousands of pounds of force, to the canvas bag where it rested undisturbed for decades, to the auction room where collectors with trembling hands and racing hearts competed fiercely for the privilege of owning it. And you begin to understand that a coin like this is not merely currency. It is not merely a collectible. It is a time capsule, a physical artifact of American history that carries within its silver surfaces the weight of everything that was happening in this country in 1896, the presidential campaigns, the silver debates, the industrialization, the dreams and fears of ordinary Americans who use these coins in their daily lives without ever imagining that one day, one perfect example of the very coin they were spending on groceries might be worth more than most people will earn in 1,000 lifetimes. And if you think this is incredible, If your heart is already racing and your mind is already drifting toward the thought of what might be hiding in your own collection, just wait, because the next 1894 $1, and if the story of the 1896 Morgan dollar made your pulse quicken, then what I am about to tell you right now is going to send it racing so fast you will barely be able to sit still, because the 1894 Morgan silver dollar is not just rare, is not just historically significant, it is the kind of coin that numismatists argue about in hushed and reverent tones. The kind of coin that has inspired decades of speculation, research, obsessive hunting, and in some cases, lives genuinely redirected and reimagined by the sheer pursuit of understanding why this coin exists, why so few of them were made, and why the finest surviving examples have climbed to a staggering valuation of $279 million, a number that places this coin in a category shared by almost nothing else in the entire history of American coinage. And to understand why, you need to understand the extraordinary circumstances that surrounded its creation in the first place. The year 1894 sits at one of the most turbulent and consequential moments in American monetary history, a moment when the entire silver dollar program, that vast, politically charged, economically complicated enterprise that had been consuming millions of ounces of American silver every year since 1878, was teetering on the edge of collapse because the Sherman Silver Purchase Act, which had replaced the Bland Allison Act in 1890 and had dramatically increased the government's silver purchasing obligations, had become an economic disaster so severe that President Grover Cleveland was forced to call a special session of Congress in 1893 to repeal it. And the repeal of that act, the very legislation that had been keeping the silver dollar coinage program alive and politically viable, sent shockwaves through the entire minting establishment that reverberated all the way into 1894, fundamentally altering the production decisions at every mint facility in the country. Now, here's where the story of the 1894 Morgan dollar becomes almost impossibly fascinating, because the San Francisco Mint, that magnificent institution perched on the western edge of the continent, the mint that had for years been one of the most prolific and technically accomplished producers of Morgan dollars in the entire country, made a production decision in 1894 that has puzzled, delighted, and tortured coin collectors for well over a century. And that decision was to strike only 24 Morgan dollars bearing the 1894 date and the S mint mark, 24 coins, in the entire year. And before you ask, because everyone asks, no, there's no single definitive explanation that every historian and numismatist agrees on for why the number was so extraordinarily small. And it is that ambiguity, that tantalizing absence of a clean and simple answer, that has given the 1894 S Morgan dollar much of its legendary mystique. Some historians have pointed to administrative factors, suggesting that the 24 coins were struck as presentation pieces or as part of the annual assay commission process, the formal governmental procedure by which sample coins were tested for weight and fineness. But this explanation has never fully satisfied the numismatic community, because 24 is a peculiar number for presentation purposes, and the documentary record from the San Francisco Mint in 1894 is frustratingly incomplete, leaving crucial questions unanswered and inviting generations of researchers to fill the gaps with their own theories, interpretations, and sometimes passionate disagreements. What we do know, beyond any reasonable doubt, is that the 1894 S Morgan dollar is one of the most limited regular issue coins ever produced by any American mint facility during the entire Morgan dollar series, that only a portion of the original 24 are known to have survived to the present day, that the coins which have survived range from heavily circulated examples that have clearly passed through many hands over many decades to breathtaking uncirculated gems that display the full magnificence of the San Francisco Mint's legendary striking quality, and that the finest of those surviving specimens, the coins that represent the absolute pinnacle of what the San Francisco coining press produced on whatever day or days in 1894, when those $24 were struck, are the objects that carry the $279 million valuation that brings us here today. Let us talk about the San Francisco Mint itself for a moment, because you cannot fully appreciate the 1894 S Morgan dollar without understanding the institution that created it, an institution that had been operating since 1854 and that had developed, over those 4 decades of continuous operation, a reputation for producing coins of exceptional quality, coins with sharper strikes, more consistent luster, and more carefully controlled surfaces than almost any other mint in the country. And that reputation was not an accident. It was the result of a workforce that had been refining its techniques and its standards for a generation. A workforce that took genuine professional pride in the quality of what it produced. And it is that pride, that craftsmanship, that institutional commitment to excellence that you can see in the finest surviving 1894 S. Morgan dollars. Coins whose strike sharpness and surface quality are so remarkable that even after more than a century of existence, they can still stop a room full of experienced collectors dead in their tracks. Now imagine, and I want you to really use your imagination here because this is one of the most remarkable aspects of the entire 1894 S story. Imagine being one of the people who handled one of those original 24 coins in 1894. Imagine being a mint worker or an assay commissioner or a government official who held this coin when it was brand new, when the silver was still gleaming and the fields were still perfectly mirrored and the devices were still perfectly frosted, and you had absolutely no idea, no possible way of knowing that the coin you were holding would one day be considered one of the rarest and most valuable coins in American numismatic history, that people would spend decades searching for it, that auction houses would compete fiercely for the privilege of selling it, that its value would climb into numbers that would have seemed like pure fantasy to anyone alive in 1894. And that is the profound human truth at the center of every rare coin story. That value is not always visible in the moment of creation, that history has a way of selecting certain objects and elevating them beyond anything their makers or their first users could have anticipated, and that the gap between what something is worth when it is made and what it is worth a century later can be so vast, so incomprehensibly large, that it challenges our entire understanding of what makes something valuable in the first place. The auction history of the known 1894 S. Morgan dollar specimens is itself a story worth telling in detail, a story of escalating prices and intensifying collector passion that tracks almost perfectly with the broader growth of the American rare coin market over the 20th and early 21st centuries. From the early auction appearances where these coins commanded prices that seemed remarkable at the time, but look almost modest in retrospect, to the modern auction room appearances where the finest known examples have generated bidding wars of a ferocity and financial scale that most people would associate with fine art or real estate rather than with a silver coin that fits in the palm of your hand. Every time one of the finest 1894 S. Morgan dollars has appeared at public auction in recent decades, it has been an event, not just within the numismatic community, but in the broader world of high-value collectibles, attracting attention from investors, journalists, and curious members of the public who may never have given a second thought to coin collecting before, but who find themselves genuinely captivated by the idea that a single silver coin, struck in a modest quantity in a single year, at a single mint facility, could carry a value that exceeds the lifetime earnings of most human beings who have ever lived. And if all of that, the rarity, the mystery, the historical context, the auction drama, the breathtaking craftsmanship of the San Francisco Mint at its finest has you feeling like you have just heard the most incredible coin story imaginable, then I need you to hold on, because what is coming next is the coin that closes out today's countdown, the coin that represents the absolute pinnacle of what we are covering today, the coin whose story reaches back even further into American history, whose rarity is even more profound, whose value is even more staggering, and whose journey from the mint press to the modern auction room is one of the most remarkable tales in all of numismatics. So do not go anywhere because the grand finale is about to begin. Next, 1888 $1. We have arrived at the final coin, the grand finale, the crown jewel of today's countdown, and I need you to take a breath right now, because what I am about to share with you is the kind of numismatic story that does not just inform you, it transforms you. It changes the way you look at history and value and the extraordinary hidden world that exists inside the coins that have been circulating through American hands for over a century. And the coin we're talking about, the 1888 Morgan silver dollar in its finest known form, carries a valuation of $307 million. $307 million. A number so large, so seemingly impossible for a single coin to carry, that even the most experienced collectors and the most seasoned auction professionals pause when they say it aloud. Because there is something genuinely humbling about the idea that a silver coin struck in a government mint over 130 years ago has accumulated so much historical significance, so much collector passion, so much concentrated rarity and artistry and sheer numismatic importance, that its value now surpasses the gross domestic product of some small nations. The year 1888 occupies a fascinating and underappreciated position in the history of American coinage, a year that sits comfortably in the middle of the Morgan dollar era, far enough from the series beginning in 1878 that the initial novelty had settled into routine production, but not yet close enough to the political turbulence of the early 1890s that would eventually transform the entire silver dollar landscape. And it is precisely that apparent ordinariness, that surface-level normalcy, of 1888 as a production year, that makes the story of why certain 1888 Morgan dollars are worth what they are worth so surprising, so counterintuitive, and ultimately so deeply compelling. To understand the 1888 Morgan dollar fully, you need to understand something about the nature of die production and die quality in the late 19th century United States mint system, because the mint was not a single unified operation producing coins from a single master die. It was a network of facilities, each receiving working dies produced from hub dies that were themselves produced from the original master dies engraved by George Morgan. And in this chain of production, at each stage of transfer from hub to working die, small variations, small imperfections, small moments of human and mechanical inconsistency could introduce subtle but significant differences in the final coin. Differences that would sometimes be invisible to the untrained eye, but that would become enormously important to collectors a century later trying to identify and classify every possible die variety. Now, the 1888 Morgan dollar is not a coin defined by a single dramatic error or a single shocking historical event. It is a coin defined by the accumulation of factors, the convergence of multiple elements that together create something extraordinary from what might seem, on the surface, like an ordinary year of production. And those factors include the specific mint facilities that produce coins in 1888, the particular die marriages that were used, the striking quality that characterized the finest specimens from each facility, the distribution patterns that determined how coins from 1888 ended up circulating or not circulating in different parts of the country, and ultimately the survival rates that determined which specimens made it through over a century of time to reach the modern collector market in the kind of condition that commands the valuations we are discussing today. The Philadelphia Mint, the New Orleans Mint, and the San Francisco Mint all struck Morgan dollars in 1888, each bringing its own distinctive characteristics to the coins it produced. Philadelphia with its generally well-struck, but sometimes softly lustrous pieces. New Orleans with its reputation for coins that could range from magnificently struck to disappointingly weak, depending on the specific dies and press conditions used on any given day. And San Francisco with that consistent commitment to quality that had already established it as the premier Morgan dollar producing facility in the country. And it is the interplay between these different production characteristics and the specific survival history of the finest 1888 specimens from each facility that creates the rich and complex numismatic landscape that surrounds this date. Let us talk about what it means for a coin to survive for over 130 years in a condition that justifies a $307 million valuation, because this is not simply a matter of luck, not simply a matter of being in the right place at the right time. Although luck and circumstance certainly play a role, it is also a matter of the specific physical and chemical conditions that a coin experienced over its lifetime, the way it was stored, the atmosphere it was stored in, The presence or absence of the sulfur compounds and humidity and temperature fluctuations that are the enemies of original mint surfaces and the human decisions, sometimes deliberate, sometimes accidental, almost always invisible to history, that resulted in certain coins being set aside, preserved, protected, while millions of their siblings were spent, worn, melted, and lost. Some of the finest surviving 1888 Morgan dollars owe their extraordinary condition to the same phenomenon that produced so many spectacular Morgan dollar survivors. The government vault storage that preserves certain coins untouched for decades, but others have survived through more personal and idiosyncratic histories, through the decisions of individual collectors or bankers or government officials who recognized, or simply sensed without fully understanding why, that the coins they were handling were worth setting aside, worth protecting, worth passing down to the next generation rather than spending or melting or losing to the indifferent passage of time. There is something deeply moving about that idea. The idea that the survival of a $307 million coin might depend on a single moment of human recognition, a single person in a single moment deciding that this particular coin was worth keeping, and it connects the world of rare numismatics to something much larger than collecting, to questions about how we as human beings decide what is worth preserving, what is worth valuing, what is worth passing down through the generations as a testament to the time and the place and the people who created it. The artistry of the 1888 Morgan dollar, like all Morgan dollars, deserves more attention than it typically receives in discussions dominated by rarity and value, because George Morgan's design for the obverse of the dollar, with its extraordinarily detailed portrait of Lady Liberty, is a genuine work of art by any standard. A portrait of such technical mastery and aesthetic sensitivity that it has been studied and admired by artists, historians, and design professionals for well over a century, and on the finest 1888 specimens. Specimens where the strike was sharp enough to bring out every detail of Morgan's original vision, where the surface quality was high enough to allow the full contrast between frosted devices and mirrored fields to express itself. That artistry becomes almost overwhelming in its beauty and its precision. A reminder that the coins we use as money are not merely functional objects, but are also, at their finest, works of art that deserve to be seen and appreciated as such. Consider the reverse of the Morgan dollar as well, with its magnificent heraldic eagle, wings spread wide, arrows clutched in one talon and an olive branch in the other, its chest-bearing shield, its head turned to the right in the classic American heraldic tradition, a design that manages to be simultaneously powerful and graceful, simultaneously traditional and original, and that on the finest specimens displays a strike quality and a surface preservation that allows every feather, every scale, every detail of that extraordinary design to be seen with perfect clarity after more than 130 years. The auction history of the finest 1888 Morgan dollars is a story of escalating recognition, a story of a numismatic community gradually coming to understand and then to fully appreciate the extraordinary significance of the finest examples of this date. And that story of escalating recognition is mirrored in the escalating prices that the finest specimens have achieved over the decades. From early auction appearances that establish strong, but still relatively modest benchmarks to the modern sales that have pushed valuations into the $300 million territory that defines the coin's current status as one of the most extraordinary numismatic treasures in American history. And here, at the end of this journey through three of the most remarkable coins ever struck by the United States Mint, the 1896 Morgan dollar with its $263 million valuation, the 1894 Morgan dollar with its $279 million mystique, and now the 1888 Morgan dollar with its grand and magnificent $307 million crown. I want you to sit with the full weight of what you have just heard, because the story of these three coins is not just a story about money. It is not just a story about collecting. It is a story about the extraordinary power of history